welcome back to The Truth in This Art. Today, I am super excited to welcome my next guest, the editor-in-chief of Baltimore Magazine. Please welcome Max Weiss. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, it's really more like welcome back to the podcast, actually.
Right. Was I one of your first guests? Because I'm under the impression I was one of your first guests.
You're one of the earlier guests in this sort of arc. We're coming up, as we're recording now, we're coming up on 800 interviews in
that is wild.
5 years somehow. And so thank you for coming back. And it's going to be a cool conversation. And before we get into like the deeper part, I always like to give folks the opportunity to introduce themselves. I think a lot of times we get sort of the cut and paste thing, like if someone gets my thing, right? If I'm going on a show or an interview or something, and it's like, who's Rob Lee? I'll just say, I'm a guy that talks, which it might be different than someone saying podcast wizard or something like that. So I want to give you the space to introduce yourself. And I have a sub point in there, but I at least want to start there.
Well, I am the editor-in-chief of Baltimore Magazine, and I've been at the magazine for 30 years. I started as a child reporter, but, I just moved my way up the masthead. Like I was a staff writer, then I was an associate editor, then I was a senior editor, then I was managing editor. Now I'm editor-in-chief. So if you stick around long enough, they will eventually make you the boss. So that's my primary job. And then I am a pop culture and film critic, which I've been doing forever. I started at the City Paper doing it. Then I was doing it on radio. I used to go on WBAL radio. Older listeners will remember Dave Durian, Alan Prell. Those were my guys. And then, radio is it's sort of a dying art form because podcasts are where it's at right now. So that kind of ended, but I've continued I did movie reviews on TV, WBAL television, and now I primarily do them in print and online. And I don't review as much as I used to, but it's really important for me because, first of all, I love film. I love analytical writing, sort of essay style, review style writing, because I get to sort of use all the muscles, the writing muscles, the analytical muscle, hopefully the sort of voicey, humorous style that I'm hopefully known for. And you can sort of put it all together. So yeah, I still love to write, but when you're an editor, you don't write as much as you used to. I mean, I try to write a few stories a year, probably about, eight or so stories, but mostly I'm just putting the magazine together. Yeah. And then the only other thing that people need to know about me is that I play cello very seriously. I'm a serious amateur cellist. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see my noodlings, and I play with the Hopkins Symphony Orchestra.
That's great. And I do follow and I do read. And yeah, I look at, Baltimore Magazine, I even, with your writing and the sort of like the pop culture side of things as well. It's a reference point for me. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting take. It's trust and it's value in it. And, as I think shared with you outside of like this podcast, obviously, that I get sort of my food knowledge in other areas, but definitely I look at, B-Mag as one of my sort of like, all right, where's the food places? What are we doing? So, I use that as a source. So for you growing up, 'cause you said you were, child reporter back in the day and all of that, which is great. We all have our sources. So growing up for you, what was a primary source for like arts and culture news, and what about those sources made it stand out? Was it the writing? Was it the layout? Speak on that a bit.
Well, I grew up in New York, not Baltimore. And so primarily my parents subscribed to the New Yorker, and they subscribed to New York Magazine. And I read all of my cultural reporting in those publications. And Pauline Kael, the great film critic, I read her when I was a child. And of course, on television, I loved Siskel and Ebert. I was very into Siskel and Ebert. I almost feel like maybe even more than Pauline Kael, who is such a brilliant writer, you almost feel like I can't do what she does. But with Siskel and Ebert, I was like, hey, I want to do that. I love what they did. But then my parents Were very encouraging of my sort of all of my artistic and creative endeavors, right? So when I was a kid, of course, I wrote, I was a creative writer. I once had a teacher who said to me, everybody who writes thinks they're a fiction writer, and then eventually they kind of figure out what kind of writer they really are. I'm not a great fiction writer, but that was how I got into it. And I did painting and drawing and of course cello playing. And I went to a music and arts camp called USDAN in New York. And so I always feel like I'm so lucky and blessed because my parents really nurtured that creative side of me. And when people just can find the arts on their own without having that kind of support system, I was in an environment where my parents were listening to classical music all the time. If you can find your way to that on your own, I have such admiration for you because it was kind of spoon fed to me in a way.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning it. Definitely, Siskel and Ebert sticks out. I'm literally about 10 hours removed from being in Chicago, so and like kind of floating around. I was like, oh, I see that. Oh, I see that. I remember the show, and my partner and I were talking about it. She was like, remember this growing up? I was like, I remember the back end of it.
Yeah, it went downhill. Unfortunately, Gene Siskel died of a brain tumor, and then they tried to find a bunch of other replacements for him, but you could not replace the magic because Siskel and Ebert were very different kinds of critics. Ebert was more populist. Siskel was a little more highbrow, and they were frenemies, they had genuine affection for each other, but there was also like real animosity there that you would sort of pick up on when you listen to them. And they were both so bright and so articulate, and they argued well. Not everybody can argue well, but they were both able to make their points. But every once in a while, some absolute contempt, was sort of seething between them. But ultimately, they did love each other, and so it was a fascinating relationship to watch, and the way they talked about film, and they introduced me to so many films. And I remember very specifically Hoop Dreams, the documentary about basketball, was a film that they really, really championed. And I watched that and just thought it was amazing. And I'm sure there were many other films, but that one sticks out. Like they really introduced me to a whole bunch of different films. And then for me as a kid, so I lived on Long Island, which is a suburb of New York City. And I would go into New York for cello lessons. And I played with the Youth Symphony Orchestra of New York. But I would also go to the museums, of course. I would go to the Met. I would go to MoMA. And I would also go to these old film houses, these sort of palaces of independent film. And there was nothing like that on Long Island. And I just remember being mesmerized by just the experience of seeing art films in these sort of rarefied spaces. And that was part of my love affair with film as well.
Thank you. That's great. We definitely, I feel like we could do a whole side podcast purely on film and film criticism.
Anytime, buddy.
So I want to move into a little bit about sort of the magazine component as we dive in, and you touched on, a bit earlier, sort of 30 years. So it's a lot to talk about there, but just sort of macroly speaking, the process of creating and putting together a magazine, such as Baltimore Magazine is huge. It's a huge task, huge undertaking. Could you walk us through like how your team, like kind of put together, let's say the most recent issue coming up for July, and, sort of any sort of behind the scenes moments that like, what will happen, can happen is kind of what I think about, but talk a bit about that.
Well, first of all, Baltimore Magazine has been around since 1907. So we're just the caretakers of this institution right now. And I think about that a lot. Like, I don't want to be the one who screws up Baltimore Magazine. So, but every issue, on the one hand, it starts with a completely blank slate, which is sort of scary, but it doesn't really. I mean, if you're familiar with any magazine, including ours, you'll see that there's recurring sections. There's always going to be the letters and the publisher's note and the table of contents. And then we have the Metro, which is the sort of smaller stories at the front of the book. We call it a book. And then the calendar of events, departments, features, and then our food coverage, which is our bread and butter, as I always joke. So we have something called a story. Thank you. We have something called a storyboard. And back in the day, like it was a physical thing. Like I had in my office, I had a big calendar with these little magnets, and we would put the names of the stories or the ideas for the stories on little slips of paper and put them on the magnets and sort of move them around. And I felt like a mad scientist moving around my board. Eventually we stepped into the 21st century, and now we do that all digitally. But we kind of map out our stories far in advance. It helps us to, write them in a timely fashion. It helps the sales department sell them in a timely fashion. And also, it's not just us, right? There's marketing, there's sales, there's the events, so sometimes they'll tie in an event with one of our stories. So they have to know in advance. And then, we'll just sort of break it down. We'll have what we call storyboard meetings, which are basically brainstorming sessions. And we'll throw out ideas, and we just always have to be mindful of it has to be very, very local. It has to be a story that if other publications have written about it, what's going to be our unique spin on it? Like a lot of times people will pitch a story to me and they'll say, oh, I was just featured in the Baltimore Sun or the Baltimore Banner. And that's not always a selling point for me. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily not going to take that story. But to me, my question is, how can we make this a Baltimore Magazine story? And what we try to do is go behind the headlines, give you more in depth. I mean, we have a month for each issue, as opposed to a daily, which just has to sort of crank it out. And believe me, I'm extremely impressed with the work that, they do at daily publications. But we're able to do deeper dives and have more interesting artwork. And hopefully we can be a little more thoughtful, do a little more research, because we have the luxury of time. So, I have a relatively small staff, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we just have these brainstorming sessions, and we put it all on what now a Google Doc. Oh, how I miss my magnetized board. I was the master of my domain, but it's on a Google Doc now. And yeah, and then we have editorial meetings every Monday where the staff gets together and we talk about the progress for the issue, look ahead to see that we're doing okay for the upcoming issue. And that's what we do.
Thank you. I mean, I mean, before I move into the next question, that's kind of a nice follow-up to it. But, I really like hearing about that. It gives me context for what I do to kind of maybe tighten up certain processes here and there. And, small team of, mostly one. And, sort of
The
thinking through,
smallest of teams.
literally, but thinking through like, the notion of when someone reaches out with a pitch, I'm taking pitches now versus and having some sort of sense of exclusivity, and not just, well, you got a thing that's great. Does it fit into maybe a theme that I'm looking at doing this month, or does it fit into the larger scope of what I'm doing? Because I get a lot of pitches. You have sort of a giant billboard go up, and I'm like, oh, that was one effect, but also it's a little more different than I was expecting. So having those check-ins, having those meetings, and being able to talk with folks such as yourself, how you go about things and how your team goes about things, I can apply sort of that small thing to how I go about what I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to have a plan, because for me, it takes away that anxiety of the empty magazine that we face every month. But you have to have a little bit of wiggle room within that structure. Perfect example, when COVID happened, we did an entire COVID issue. That was not on the storyboard, but the word pivoted, we pivoted to that because we felt like that was the biggest story. Similarly, George Floyd, when the sort of Black Lives Matter movement really took off after that, we did a sort of a George Floyd based, feature story about Black life in Baltimore. Again, we felt like there was this national conversation that was relevant to Baltimore City in particular. And we felt like it was important for us to be part of that conversation. And that story actually won us a City Regional Magazine Award. So, the idea is you have that structure, and that is your foundation, and you can sort of lean on it, and it's great that it's there. And you have to do a lot of work in advance to get to that point where you have it. But then once you do, you're so glad that you did all that early, work. But then within that structure, you can't be so married to it that you can't be flexible, because sometimes a bigger story comes along and you just have to tackle that.
100%. I'll look at this and I plan out, like, I have grant conversations and things of the sort. And, folks want to see, like, so what are you doing for the year? How many episodes are you coming out with? And so on. And, I always kind of over deliver versus under deliver. That's sort of my hallmark. And, at times I'll have people reach out and it's just like, oh, I already did the 4 for this month. But I was like, this is a really good conversation. And I start going through sort of my internal checklist. Okay, is it Baltimore? Check. Is it interesting to me? Check. And, I kind of do that. I'm like, I'll figure it out. But to your point, having the strategy and having sort of that way to have wiggle room, almost look at it like a diet. As long as you're within your macros, it's like, look, I'm gonna have that cheesecake. That's going to be great. I'm gonna work this cheesecake into this week's food, So let's talk a bit about role, as in, editor in chief, and sort of as you talked about climbing the ladder, going further up, for a podcaster, you just fall downward, you just do less, um, what is your favorite thing about the role?
It's going to sound corny, but it's working with all these talented people at the magazine. I mean, I'm just really inspired by how great they are, how dedicated they are to the magazine. We're all a little obsessed with the magazine, and you sort of have to be that way, I think. Like literally calling each other at, 11 p.m. to change a single word, that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I love the team that I work with. They're wonderful collaborators. They're wonderful people. And, we have fun. We work hard, but we also have fun, and we try to go out together as a group. And we recently went bowling. We have karaoke coming up in the future. It's particularly important because, we work remotely now. We do have a shared office space that we come together for meetings, and some people use it to work in. But for the most part, we're a little siloed. So it's really important for us to come together. And we've got a lot of Zoom meetings. Zoom was a lifesaver. But yeah, I clearly could not do it myself. And I'm just so happy that I have the staff that I have, because they're just amazing writers, amazing editors, amazing thinkers, and they care so much about the magazine. Yeah. So that's the number one thing for sure.
Oh, yeah. So in sort of similar but slightly different territory, what is a particular aspect of the job and of sort of, Baltimore Magazine that you find particularly rewarding? Perhaps there's a memorable experience in the last year or so that sticks out. They're like, yeah, that was a good one. That was a good point there.
Well, we love Baltimore, right? We really, really do. But I think that what we're good at is celebrating Baltimore, which we absolutely do. And we really try to point out the highest quality of living in Baltimore. Like, these are the coolest restaurants. These are the coolest arts venues. These are the coolest bars. These are the coolest neighborhoods, all that stuff. But we're also not burying our head in the sand when it comes to Baltimore's problems. Although a lot of times when we do journalism about the problems of Baltimore, we're kind of solutions oriented. So, it's like if we're writing a story about corruption in the city, it's like, here's some strategies for cleaning that up. If we're writing a story about like what's going on with the harbor place, here's some of our ideas for what could make the harbor place thrive. So, but I like that we don't shy away from the problems of the city, while simultaneously, I mean, my number one thing I want people to feel when they read Baltimore Magazine is, oh, Baltimore is a cool place. It's vibrant. I want the magazine to capture the sort of pulse of Baltimore. I love Baltimore, and it's an underdog city. I would say less so. I think more and more the reputation of Baltimore is rising, and people are beginning to realize that it's incredibly creative hub and an amazing place to visit and to live. But, our thing is Baltimore is a great city. It deserves a great city magazine. And that's what we try to do. We try to have a magazine that is worthy of this amazing city.
That's great. That's just wonderful. I think when we have these things that, when I do this, and I've done a lot in a short period of time, and even thinking about when, sort of it blew up, and it was probably 2020, people are home. So I think, there's sort of two sides to that, or my sort of reasoning for starting it. It was, sort of a slap in the face when folks were dissing Baltimore, the Trump of it all, or even, I went to, Morgan State University, some, people from different parts of the region. You have some New Yorkers, you have some DC, and they're like, oh, Baltimore's whack. And I'm like, you are going to school here. What are you saying? And, and being definitely having that sort of rally cry and, really being activated. And that's one of the things that, I really dig about, Baltimore Magazine, sort of like being able to speak on, okay, this place is cool. I like it from this sort of perspective, and covering things that really align with what my values are, but also being real about it versus this is just a straight advertisement of how great everything is. And we're only looking at this. I know there's a cloud behind us, but only the sun. It's just like, no, let's cover it in a sort of a real way. And I think for the sort of like Baltimore audience, for sake of argument, we're very much into that, whereas if it's just one side, one perspective, it falls short. It's like it's not telling the whole story. And as a place, as you touched on the underdog thing, and I think often it's a sort of we don't get the full story sort of thing when it comes to it. It's like, hey, cover these aspects. And we're trying to get as much Baltimore concentrated in 15 minutes, for whatever that time might look like, that when those lapses and those things are missed, it really feels kind of stark because there's so few and far between like opportunities for it to be out there.
It's such a balance, right? Because you really want to celebrate the city. You want to say to all the haters, this is one of the greatest cities in America. And we do that. But at the same time, you don't want to be Pollyanna-ish. You don't want to be naive, because if you do that, you're just not keeping it real. And I think that you nailed it. People in Baltimore, they know when you're BSing them. They know when you're not coming from a sincere place. So, and they also understand if the criticism is constructive and comes from a place of love, as opposed to if the criticism is judgmental, has a certain political ideology that is not pro-Baltimore, pro-urban life. I think you kind of know what I'm getting at with this. Yeah. I'm not going to actually name names, but, it's like Ron Cassie, who's our great senior editor, who writes a lot of our deep dives. I think you've had him as a guest, and we'll undoubtedly have him again soon. But he wrote this book called If You Love Baltimore, It Will Love You Back.
Yeah.
And, that to me, that just really sums it up. And that's sort of the ethos that we try to bring to the magazine.
Yeah. And I've heard that sort of like arc through several folks, what have you. And in this time of, being there at the magazine, 30 years, do you get bored? Like talk about that.
No, it's really interesting you say that, because even though it's been one job, it feels like many different jobs. The reason being, the staff has turned over so much. Actually, right now we're in a pretty steady pace. We've had a lot of the same people for a while. But, when I started, it was like a whole different crew of people. And we were in different offices. Then we moved to another office in Harbor East. We were there for a while. And every 5 or so years, it does feel like a whole new job, right? So that's part of what has kept me energized all of these years. It really does not feel like I've had the same job for 30 years. But then also, the beauty of a magazine and the beauty of being a journalist is that you're learning new things every single day. And if you have a curious mind, there is no better job to have than being a journalist. So every issue is a new adventure. Every story, I'm learning something, whether I'm reading it or writing it. Now, with Baltimore Magazine, as I'm sure you know, and the readers know, we do have certain stories that we do every single year. We always do Best of Baltimore, which we're putting the finishing touches on right now. We always do Best Restaurants, which is one of our best-selling issues. We do Top Docs every year. I think those are like the main ones that we do every single year. So within those stories, sometimes the key is finding a fresh approach or a fresh way to make it, because you definitely don't want to be like, oh God, here I go. I'm doing my 30th Best of Baltimore. You have to find ways to sort of energize yourself. But when it comes to the rest of the stories, we get really geeked about it. Like for example, the current cover story, which is this crab classics. Okay, now we cover crabs every single year. Obviously, it's one of our mainstays. The readers love to read about crabs. We love to write about crabs. But, how are we going to approach the crab issue? Like last year, we did something called a crab crawl, which was like in different neighborhoods and where you should go for your crab appetizer, your crab entree, your crab related beverage. And then this year, Crab Classics, which was done by senior editor Lydia Wolliver, it's about those truly authentic crab houses, the ones that just, time has forgotten, and you sort of walk in and the nostalgia factor is part of the love of it, because I think most people do have like a huge nostalgia factor when it comes to crabs and crab houses. So when you go into a place and you're just like, yeah, this is the place. They've been doing it like this for 50 years. They know exactly what they're doing. It's some family recipe that's been passed down from generation to generation. And you just know that you've come to the right spot. So that's what we did this year for the crab. And, next year, who knows? We've done best crab cakes. We've done all different kinds of things. So that's the fun in a way, reinventing the wheel. But those are the stories that we always do. But then there's just so many exciting people and things to write about every single issue. So on top of, my staff that I love to work with, and the entire staff of the magazine, it's just, Baltimore is never boring. Ergo, working for Baltimore Magazine is never boring.
Exactly. It's part of this idea when you have these standards that it's just like, we know we're going to cover sort of this. We have this, these topics, sort of this issue is going to be here. And it's this idea I've been playing with. I'm trying to apply it to what I do, but it's literally I'm playing with it. I understand it's a design philosophy of most advanced yet acceptable. It's sort of that. It's just like, yeah, we're doing something, but it's familiar enough that we're taking a different take on it. It's a different spin. So Crab Classics has touched on. It's just like, oh, we're going to get a story around crabs. Yeah, we're taking a different approach towards it, but it's still territory that our crab lovers, our crab enthusiasts, our enthusiasts around sort of what Baltimore Magazine is known for are going to be like, oh, this is extending this. This is opening this up a bit further. And that's really good.
Yeah. And, I have this incredible institutional memory, as you can imagine, having worked at the magazine for so long. But sometimes I will say, oh, we just wrote about that, and it was 8 years ago, Right. So you have to also remember that the audience recycles, and, just because maybe you are really familiar with something, that doesn't mean that the audience is. And, there's always, things are going to always evolve. There's always going to be a fresh take that you can do on something. And that is one of the things that we have to always do at the magazine. Like, remember that we have new readers, people who are new to Baltimore. Not everybody knows Baltimore the way that we do. So part of what we're doing is reminding people about this cool stuff and reintroducing places and people. So that's part of it. Again, it's another thing you have to balance, because you want a lot of new stuff, but sometimes the classic places deserve, a chance to be recognized again. So you get an issue like Crab House Classic.
Oh yeah, love it. So I got three more real questions, and I definitely got rapid fire questions for you. I've been typing away as we've been talking. So I want to talk a little bit, because we've teased the July issue a bit. But I want to talk about the June issue a little bit. So it's a story on ContraPoints. So I want to talk about that. Natalie Wynn, right?
Natalie Wynn, yes. So
Yeah.
If people don't know who Natalie Wynn is, she is a YouTuber. She has a page where she calls herself ContraPoints, and she is this amazing talker. She takes on social issues, LGBTQ plus issues. She's a trans woman, but really just cultural issues, and talks about them in the most wildly entertaining, trenchant, humorous, incisive way. So I call her the trans millennial Fran Lebowitz in the story. And first of all, I didn't know she was from Baltimore. And then when I found out, I was like, oh man, I've got to write about her. So I ended up meeting her in her brownstone, and she has this amazing, very sort of ornate, Gothic, I think I called it a cross between a Victorian mansion and a brothel in the story. And we sat down and talked. And, sometimes when you meet people you admire, it's like a little disappointing. They're like, they don't live up to the expectations. Well, she did. She exceeded my expectations. She was so quick, so funny, so open. So I was really happy to write that story about her, and hopefully, she's got millions of fans, but I'm not sure that they're Baltimore-based fans. It's sort of international. So I think that I was showing people in Baltimore, hey, this really cool person lives in Baltimore. And I don't know if you ever get a chance to interview her for this podcast, but I recommend it highly. I think she's a little private in a way. She talks about that, how she can be so open on a YouTube channel and speak to literally millions of people, but she's actually shy. That there is something about the intimacy of, you got this camera on you and you're talking and you feel like you're talking to one person, and the abstraction of it's actually literally millions of people. You don't think about that. So she can really open up to on a one-on-one interview, or open up when she's alone, creating these elaborate backdrops and sets for her YouTube videos. You really have to check them out. Oh, the other thing about her videos is that they're incredibly long. She breaks all the rules of what we've learned about podcasts and YouTube, which is like, keep it pithy. People don't have all day. People have short attention spans. Her videos will be like 2 hours long, and people are just like, give me more, feed me more. So yeah, that's the June issue. I also did a interview with Ego Nwodim from Saturday Night Live.
Wow, really?
In that issue. She's also from Baltimore. And very, very cool lady. She's bringing improv to Baltimore City schools. Like, she thinks that improv is this amazing skill set for young people, teaches them active listening, teaches them to be creative. It's community building. She said improv changed her life, so she wants to bring improv to Baltimore City schools. So that's sort of how she gives back to the town she grew up in. And Ego Nwodim, she's amazing. I mean, people know her from SNL. She's so funny, so smart, so cute, so talented. I mean, she is just a superstar.
That is great. I'm going to be putting my pitches out there because look, I like to make those connections when it's just like, sometimes we'll have folks that have a connection here who are even living in here in Baltimore, and it's just like, oh, do they? It's like, yes, I passed them at Whole Foods, or I passed them at, a crab place, or, we were at one of these crab houses, what have you. And yeah, it's cool to be able to know about, folks that are doing stuff and have it, covered in Baltimore Magazine, and in your words, with your way of writing. So, as far as those interviews go. So as we kind of got a little bit of the June issue, we should talk about the current, upcoming, the July issue.
July issue on newsstands now, right?
Yeah.
So we have the Crab House Classics, which I mentioned.
Yes.
We also have Ron Cassie's hilarious story on Barry Glazer. The E of don't urinate on my leg and tell me it's raining, babe. And the thing about Barry Glazer is, what you see is what you get with the guy. He really is this incredibly colorful, larger than life. He really is fighting for the little guy. Comes from an honest place. He loves celebrity. Like, he really, really wants to be famous. And of course, we liken him to Saul from Better Call Saul. The story is called Better Call Barry. And Ron Cassidy just hangs out with him. We get to go inside his very weird and kind of wonderful, profane world. And you really, it's a bit of a jaw dropper with this guy because he just lets it all hang out. And he's a extremely colorful character. As Ron points out in the story, almost every town has their famous, goofy, over the top television lawyer.
Yeah.
But I doubt there are as many quite as wild as Barry Glazer. So that's another great story to read in the July issue on newsstands. Yeah.
It's great. That's great. So I got one last real question and then the rapid fire ones.
And are we going to talk about our partnership?
Yes, let's talk about it. Yes.
Right. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, so Baltimore Magazine is going to be partnering with The Truth in This Art. Basically, we love the podcast. We thought it really intersected very well with what we do at the magazine. So what you should look for going forward is more interviews with Baltimore Magazine editors, more interviews with Baltimore Magazine writers, and then also with subjects. And you'll just be seeing a little more Baltimore Magazine related content, but it's not going to change what Rob does, right? Rob is going to be conducting interesting interviews with interesting people. And, it's just we're going to find where his interest and our interests align and create this partnership. And this is just the first step. I mean, we're going to see where it grows from here, but we're very pleased and proud to be partnering up with your great podcast. So,
well, thank you. I'm super excited, super happy as well. This is definitely an alignment that makes sense. I think it's going to be great. And the other thing about it is just definitely it has to make sense. It always has to make sense. And and this is kind of in the trajectory of the sort of the question I was going to ask there of sort of if there is one or two items that always like, this is a Baltimore Magazine story. This is absolutely something we have to cover. So like, for instance, I'm doing this, there are interviews that it's like, it's a good interview. Don't know if it fits here. Don't know if it fits like overall. What is sort of that criteria, when, especially in thinking of sort of the last two issues, and obviously you're going to be working on an August one very soon, I would imagine, to be put together.
We are in the thick of August right now. I mean, it's always why this story and why now, like those are the sort of crucial questions. Every once in a while, somebody is so interesting that they don't really need to justify with the why now. We just think, well, our readers really need to know about this person. This is really cool. But so why the story, why now? And then the other thing is there a good story here? Is there a story that we can tell? Because there are interesting people, but there may not be a narrative arc. So you kind of want to have a beginning and a middle and an end to any story. Think of it almost like a movie in that sense. So when we're writing particularly profiles and feature stories, we're just thinking like, is there an interesting narrative arc? Is there a hero's journey or whatever you want to call it? So really it comes down to sometimes somebody will pitch me something and I'm like, this is good. This is interesting, but it's not going to make a good story, or not going to make a good magazine story. Like maybe it could make a good daily newspaper story, but a magazine story, it really has to be engrossing. It has to be the kind of thing that you curl up with, on your couch or wherever you are. And you really get involved in it in the way that you might get involved in a novel or something. So those are the key things. And obviously, just like you, has to be Baltimore. We really are pretty strict about that. Although, we get into obviously Baltimore County, Howard County, even Arundel, and we do, Eastern Shore a little bit too, because our readers often vacation on the Eastern Shore. But ultimately, we're laser focused on Baltimore.
Yeah, and thank you, because that's what it is here. Like, occasionally I'm chasing what is of interest to me, but always it's a Baltimore perspective, it's a Baltimore sensibility. As I said, I was in Chicago. I went to a Cubs game. I had my flag flying high. I was just like, yo, we're out here. It's Baltimore, right, guys? Like, I don't tell you.
You were wearing your Orioles gear?
I was wearing my custom, Rob Lee Wave Daddy jersey, Orioles jersey, custom done by, RV Adams, what have you, customized it for me, had that on at the game. And I
Nice.
was like, look, it's super hot. It was a black jersey, so maybe mistakes, but still, I rep Baltimore through the sweat.
Okay, so that explains it because sometimes when you'll go to a game and you see somebody wearing colors that are neither Orioles nor the other team on the field, and you're like, why are you wearing those colors? But now I get it. You're repping your hometown. That's what's happening. Okay, I get that now.
Alrighty. So we got the real stuff, we got the real
Okay,
questions
all
covered.
right.
Now I
I'm scared.
got a couple rapid fire questions.
All right, here we
All
go.
right. So here's the first one. What you mentioned, cello. Um, what is an additional skill that you have? Like something you saying, well, you know what? I do this very well as in addition to sort of like magazines, sort of writing, criticism, cello. There's a laundry list. I'm building it up. But what's another skill that you may not have mentioned that you do really well?
Every day I play spelling bee, and you know that the New York Times spelling bee. By the way, Sam Mazursky, the editor of that from Baltimore, I interviewed him, and I love it, and I'm really good at it, and I always get to genius, and I try to get to Queen Bee, which is the highest level. So, yeah, very into word games and spelling bee in particular. So that's I don't know if that counts, but that's another skill that I have.
It
Yeah,
does. It does. I
I
mean,
love it. Oh, and I love Twitter. I used to love it more before, Musk bought it. He kind of ruined it. I mean, it's like really been this like slow drip of Twitter being ruined. But if follow me at Max the Girl on Twitter, and you'll get a glimpse inside my glass brain.
right. And having that the sort of word being good at word games, I would imagine that serves you really well as a writer.
Yeah, I love words. I really do love words. I also really love to write. I'm reluctant to say this because I feel like I'm going to jinx myself, but I almost never get writer's block. I just love to write. I get into the zone. I love to work with words and express myself. And I think one of the reasons why I rarely get writer's block is because my writing is very conversational. And this is what I always tell young writers, like, tell the story like you're sitting over dinner with a friend, tell the story like you would tell it to another person. Yeah, we're all storytellers. So, yeah, I love to write. So, of course, yeah, I love word games.
I'm gonna try to apply that. I'm gonna try to apply that because I've been told I should write. I've been told I should do improvs, all these different things. But I already see it's gonna be a bunch of asides. I get a little too deep into the storytelling piece. It's gonna be all asides.
I mean, asides are they're part of writing actually, and that's a whole style unto itself. If you want to have like a sort of digressive style, that's a thing. So but yeah, and that's the other thing. Don't be intimidated by writing. Just tackle it and find your own voice, and don't feel like it has to be a certain thing. It
Yeah.
can be it can be looser and more creative than you think it can be. So that's my other.
So here's the second question I got for you.
Okay.
You could probably see in this is going to be audio and some visual, but as you can see, I'm wearing gray. I love this color. It speaks in multiple ways. Neutrality is like always in the middle. What is a color that you just like? This is what I wear. I'm always in this somehow.
Well, first of all, I really love fashion, although not everybody would know that about me because my fashion style is kind of laid back. It's sort of bohemian, if you will. But it's like I spend a lot of money to look like I don't spend a lot of money. Um, but I'm wearing the color. I'm blue. Blue is my color, particularly this kind of denim-y blue.
Yeah.
I love denim blue, and I have tons of pairs of jeans, tons of denim jackets, and shirts like this. So that's I would say it goes beautifully with my blue eyes, except I don't have blue eyes. Wishful thinking. Wouldn't that be nice? But no, this Jewish girl has brown eyes. So yeah, blue is my color.
It's good. Here's the last one.
Okay.
Going back to sort of penning it together and penning it together with our partnership, our collaboration. Um, who's an up and coming figure in Baltimore's arts and culture that you feel like you want to shout out in these final moments here?
I would say Rob Lee is the up and coming person in Baltimore. No, I'm serious. I think that you're very talented. I love that you're having these conversations. Honestly, when we looked to collaborate with somebody, you were at the forefront of our mind because we think that you're doing it right. And you're the answer. But then the other answer I would maybe give is Jonathan Hayward, who is the new maestro of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I did a profile of him. He is such a lovely man. You can find that profile online. He loves music. He's so passionate about it, but he also gets it. He doesn't want classical music to be this stuffy thing. He wants to bring it to all. He wants to open up who listens to classical music and what classical music can be and what it can do. So Rob Lee, one, and then two, Jonathan Hayward.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. That's a really great answer. And I love chatting with Jonathan as well. And, chatting with myself. I talk to myself all the time. So that's pretty much it for the pod, for today's conversation. So there's two things I want to do to close out. One, I want to thank you for coming back on to the podcast and spending some time with me today. And two, I want to invite and encourage you in the sort of shameless plugging of it all, social media, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Okay, so BaltimoreMagazine.com, that's number one. You can find all of our wonderful writing there. For me personally, you can find my movie reviews at Rotten Tomatoes. I am a top critic there. You can find me on Twitter, which I refuse to call X. You can find me on Instagram, Max the Girl. I'm Max the Girl everywhere. I think that covers it. BaltimoreMagazine.com, baby.
Well, there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Max Weiss for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.